Hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're diving into a shocking twist. Lin's DNA lies spread so far that even Mrs. Lan refuses to see Tu Tieu, while Yuri is trapped in an emergency vote that could steal Ansang overnight. And Lin won't stop calling his mother until she breaks. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. Morning hit like a deadline. Yuri walked into Ansang company with the calm of someone who had run out of time to panic. The lobby was polished and quiet. Glass, marble, clean lines. But the air felt sharp, as if every employee already knew a knife was coming down somewhere upstairs. His lawyer matched his pace. "They'll rush the vote," the lawyer murmured. "Your job is to slow the clock." Yuri nodded once. "I don't need to win today. I just need to stop them from winning." The elevator carried them up in silence. Yuri's phone felt heavy in his pocket, not because of the device, but because of the threats that had been landing all night from unknown numbers, short sentences, cold warnings, words designed to make a man hesitate. Yuri didn't hesitate. The doors opened onto the conference floor and the place was already awake. Assistants moved quickly with folders and tablets. People in suits whispered in tight pairs. A projector hummed, ready to display someone else's future. A long table sat under harsh light like a battlefield prepared in advance. At each seat lay a printed agenda. Emergency shareholders, meeting temporary restructuring proposal, leadership adjustment. Yuri didn't sit immediately. He scanned the room. Some faces were familiar. Board members, older shareholders, staff who had always avoided confrontation. He saw tension in their shoulders, fear in their eyes. The kind of fear that comes when people suspect the decision has already been made somewhere else. Then he saw them. GOC's representatives sat together, calm and prepared, folders thick and neatly arranged. Their posture was relaxed, like people who were already holding the key. Near the window stood Lin. She held a folder close to her chest, dressed perfectly, hair neat, expression gentle, like she was there to help, not to destroy. When her eyes met Yuri's, she smiled. Not warm, not friendly. A smile that said, "You're late." Yuri's lawyer leaned in. "Don't react. Everything she wants is emotional." Yuri's voice stayed flat. "She won't get it." He sat down. The chair felt colder than it should have. His lawyer placed a clean stack of objections and formal requests on the table, ready like a shield. The moderator, someone Yuri used to consider neutral, stood and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for attending on short notice," the moderator began. "Due to concerns regarding company stability and leadership effectiveness, today we will vote on a temporary restructuring plan to protect shareholder interests." Yuri's lawyer raised a hand immediately. "Before any vote, we request verification of proxies and confirmation of the share transfer chain within the last 30 days. A ripple moved through the room. Papers shifted. People glanced at Ngok's side. Ngok's lead representative smiled politely. "We already submitted the required documents." Yuri leaned forward slightly. "Then you won't mind showing them again?" The moderator hesitated. "Mr. Yuri, this is an emergency meeting." "Emergency doesn't mean lawless," Yuri cut in, calm but sharp. "Start with proxy verification." The lawyer slid a written objection across the table. "We also request review of any newly transferred shares for validity, including whether the seller acted under misinformation or coercion." The word coercion landed like a stone. Lin's smile didn't change, but her eyes narrowed just a fraction, small enough that only someone watching her closely would notice. Ngok's representative leaned back. "That's a serious accusation." Yuri met his gaze. "So is buying 55% of a company and trying to change the leadership overnight." The room thickened with tension. The moderator looked between the legal teams, then sighed. "Fine. Proxy verification first." Yuri's lawyer whispered, "Good. We've bought minutes." Yuri didn't reply. Minutes mattered. But something else was pulling at his attention. Something personal, painful, and dangerous. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it. Not yet. Across town, Tu Tieu stood outside a government office with a folder clutched to her chest. The building looked ordinary. No drama, no spectacle. Just fluorescent lights behind glass doors and people waiting with quiet faces. But today, this place felt heavier than a courtroom. Because she wasn't just defending her reputation, she was defending her blood. Tuong stood beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the street like he expected trouble to arrive on a motorbike at any moment. He didn't speak much, but his presence was steady, protective, like an unspoken promise that she wouldn't face Lin alone again. Tu Tieu exhaled slowly. If Lin is lying, procedure will kill her lie. Tuong's voice was calm. If she doesn't sabotage it first. Tu Tieu's folder held everything she could control. The complaint number, the request for police-supervised chain of custody DNA sampling, documentation of threats, and a record that the sealed envelope had been submitted as evidence. But one person remained outside her control. Mrs. Lanya Tu Tieu had been calling since dawn, no answer, again at 7, no answer, again at 8. Voicemail. At 9, a message appeared. Unknown number. Stop calling. She doesn't want to see you. Tu Tieu's stomach tightened. She stared at the screen until the letters seemed to burn. Tuong leaned closer. Another threat? Tu Tieu swallowed hard. Not just a threat. She tried again anyway. Ring, ring, voicemail. Her chest tightened. She switched to the home line because maybe Mrs. Lan would answer a familiar number. It rang longer. Then, click. A breath. Mum? Tu Tieu whispered. A long pause. Mrs. Lan's voice finally came through. Quiet and guarded. Like she was speaking from behind a door she refused to open. Why are you calling me? The coldness in the tone made Tu Tieu's throat tighten. Mum, please, Tu Tieu said quickly. I need to see you. I'm trying to end Lin's lies officially. Just come with me. Just for a statement, just once. No, Mrs. Lan said sharply. One word and Tu Tieu felt it like a slap. Mum, what do you mean, no? Tu Tieu's voice shook. She told Yuri's mother I'm not your daughter. She's spreading that lie everywhere. If we do this officially, it ends. I know, Mrs. Lan cut in. Tu Tieu's heart jumped. Then why won't you meet me? Mrs. Lan's voice trembled. Fear and doubt tangled together. 'Cause what if she's right? Tu Tieu went cold. Mom, she whispered, why would you believe her over me? Silence, then faint movement like pacing. Like Mrs. Lan was trying to breathe through a storm inside her chest. Mrs. Lan spoke again, fast, as if she'd been holding the words for days. Lin said you might not be mine. She said she has proof. She said I was fooled. Tu Tieu's eyes burned. Mum, Lin is lying, Tu Tieu said, forcing her voice to stay steady. She lies to control people. She lies to control you. Mrs. Lan's voice rose, panicked. Stop calling me. I can't think when you pressure me like this. Pressure you? Tu Tieu's voice cracked. Mum, I'm begging you, meet me once, look at me, let me prove it. No, Mrs. Lan repeated, sharper now, defensive. If you really are my daughter, why do I feel so scared right now? That question hurt more than any insult Lin had ever thrown. Tu Tieu swallowed hard, tears rising. Because Lin taught you to be scared of me. For a second, Mrs. Lan's breathing changed, like she might soften, like she might say, come home. But then her tone turned rigid again. I need time, Mrs. Lan whispered. Tu Tieu shook her head. Mum, time is exactly what Lin is stealing. Don't come to my house, Mrs. Lan said firmly. I'm not seeing you today. And then she hung up. Tu Tieu stared at her phone like it had turned into a stranger. Tuong's voice was low. She believes Lin. Tu Tieu wiped her eyes quickly, refusing to let them fall in public. Not fully. Tuong frowned. She sounded convinced. She sounded terrified, Tu Tieu said, jaw tightening. And Lin feeds on fear. Inside the office, the investigator greeted them with a neutral expression. You're back. Tu Tieu placed her folder on the counter. We want to proceed with official DNA sampling. The investigator scanned the paperwork. To proceed, we need all required parties. At minimum, the claimant and the person whose relationship is being questioned. Depending on scope, we may need Mrs. Lan's cooperation. She won't come, Tutier said, voice tight. If she refuses voluntarily, the investigator replied evenly, we can request cooperation, but it takes time. Time. Always time. Tutier's jaw clenched. Lin will use the delay. Twong stepped forward slightly. Can you summon Lin first? She made the claim. The investigator nodded. We can issue a summons and request supporting documents. Tutier let out a short breath. She doesn't have documents. She has rumours. Rumours become a case when they cause harm, the investigator said calmly. But we still follow procedure, Tutier nodded. Fine, summon her, and I'll keep trying with Mrs. Lan. Her phone buzzed, a message from Yuri. They're stalling, but Lin is here. I'm buying time. How's your side? Tutier's fingers trembled as she typed. Mrs. Lan won't meet me. She believes Lin. She thinks I might not be her daughter. The reply came quickly. What? Why? Tutier stared at the screen, then typed. Because Lin planted doubt. Mum is afraid. She's refusing to show up. Tutier put the phone down chest tight. This is what Lin wanted, she whispered. Back in the meeting room, Yuri's phone vibrated. He glanced down, read Tutier's message, and felt his chest go tight. Across the table, Lin noticed immediately. Her gaze sharpened, focused, satisfied, like she could smell blood. Yuri slid his phone away and raised his hand again. Since we're verifying proxies, I want a complete list of shareholders present, including any new voting rights obtained in the last 72 hours. Ngok's representative smiled thinly. That's unnecessary. Yuri leaned forward. Then it should be easy to provide. The moderator looked uncomfortable. Mr. Yuri. Yuri's lawyer cut in smoothly. This request is standard under disputed transfer circumstances. Lin's voice entered, soft and sweet. Yuri, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Yuri turned toward her slowly. Funny, that's exactly what you told my mother. Lin's smile froze for half a second. The moderator cleared his throat. Proxy verification is complete. We will now move to the restructuring vote. Yuri stood. Yuri, objection, he said clearly, voice cutting through the room. We challenge the validity of the 55% transfer under potential manipulation and misinformation. This vote cannot proceed. Gasps, whispers, shock. The moderator stiffened. Mr. Yuri. Yuri didn't sit back down. He held his gaze on Lin like she was the only person in the room. Do it, Yuri said quietly, almost daring her. Let's see if your plan survives daylight. Lin's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. They flicked toward the door, and Yuri's stomach dropped because he realized someone was about to walk in. Someone with papers. Someone with authority. Someone Lin had been waiting for. The conference room door opened, and the temperature seemed to drop. A man in a grey suit stepped in carrying a slim black briefcase. Behind him came a woman with a tablet and stamped papers. They didn't look like ordinary shareholders. They looked like people who arrived when decisions were already written. Ngok's lead representative rose politely. Counsel, thank you for coming. Lin's eyes flicked toward Yuri. Her smile stayed small and controlled, like a lock clicking shut. The moderator cleared his throat. We've received documentation confirming the purchasing party's voting eligibility for today's emergency meeting. Yuri didn't sit back. From whom? The grey suit lawyer spoke evenly. I represent the purchasing party. The transfer submission has been recorded. Voting rights are valid. Yuri's lawyer lifted a hand. Submission isn't final verification. We request originals, the bank confirmation timeline, and a full proxy audit. The grey suit lawyer smiled. You're attempting to delay. Yuri leaned forward, calm but sharp. You're attempting to rush. Whispers spread along the table. Lin stayed quiet, almost serene, letting Yuri burn energy on paper. Proceed, Ngok's representative urged. The company needs stability. Yuri's lawyer slid a formal objection forward. We dispute the 55% transfer under manipulation and misinformation. Any vote today will be contested. The moderator hesitated. Counsel? Proxy verification is complete, the grey suit lawyer said, nodding to the stamped stack. Summaries are attached. Yuri's lawyer didn't touch them. We want originals and identification of proxy holders. Lin finally spoke, soft and sweet. Yuri, please. Everyone here wants to protect Ansang. Yuri turned slowly. If it wasn't personal, you wouldn't have dragged my mother into your DNA story. Lin's smile froze for a beat, then softened. I only shared a concern. I didn't want your family to be fooled. You wanted them to doubt, Yuri said. The moderator swallowed. We will move to the restructuring vote. Before you do, Yuri said, standing, record this. I formally challenge any voting power derived from the disputed 55% transfer. If this meeting proceeds, it proceeds under contested authority. A shareholder muttered, Can he do that? Yuri's lawyer answered flatly. Yes. Ngok's representative leaned forward. You're intimidating people. I'm warning them, Yuri replied. Lin tilted her head. If you trust procedure, let the meeting proceed and let lawyers fight later. Yuri stared at her. Procedure doesn't listen to your tears. A flicker of anger crossed Lin's eyes, quickly buried. The moderator raised his hands. Enough. Voting will begin. Tablets lit up. Voting cards lifted. The room held its breath. Yuri's lawyer whispered, urgent. If this passes, they can install interim control immediately. Yuri's eyes stayed on Lin. Then we don't let it pass. He raised his voice. Final request. Identity verification for all proxy holders present. Denied, the grey suit lawyer said. Lawful request, Yuri's lawyer snapped back. The moderator's face tightened. A staff member appeared at the door, pale. Mr. Yuri, there's an urgent situation outside. Yuri's pulse jumped. What? Your mother is here, the staff member said. She's crying. She says Lin won't stop calling her. Lin's gaze sharpened instantly. Yuri shoved his chair back. Pause the vote. The moderator stammered. We can't. Yuri didn't wait. He strode out. His lawyer followed, hissing. Yuri, if you leave, they'll vote without you. Yuri didn't slow down. If my mother breaks, everything breaks. Across town, Tutier stood in a government office hallway under harsh fluorescent lights. The investigator had agreed to summon Lin, but everything else was process and timeline. Mrs. Lan still wouldn't answer. Tutier tried again. Voicemail. Tuong watched her grip the phone. Call the home line. Tutier did. Ring, ring, nothing. She typed. Mom, please meet me once. Let me prove it officially. No reply. Then an unknown text arrived. She's done listening to you. Stop before you hurt her. Tutier showed Tuong, his eyes narrowed. They're isolating her. Tutier marched to the desk. I want to add a statement. Threat messages and possible manipulation of Mrs. Lan. The investigator reviewed the screenshots. We'll attach these. If you believe she's being coerced, we can request a welfare check, but we need a clear reason. Tutier swallowed hard. Someone is pressuring her to avoid me. The pressure is escalating. She signed the supplementary statement, forcing her hand not to shake. Her phone buzzed. Yuri. They're forcing the vote. Mum won't meet you. Tutier typed. She refuses. Lin convinced her I might not be her daughter. Yuri replied, Stay with Tuong. Don't go to her house alone. Tutier stared at the screen. If I wait, Lin wins, she whispered. Back at Ansang, Yuri found his mother in the hallway outside the meeting room. Her face was wet with tears, both hands trembling around her phone. Yuri held her shoulders. Mum, breathe. She clutched his sleeve. Lin keeps calling. She keeps saying Tutier isn't Lan's daughter. She says I was fooled. I can't think. Yuri took her phone and checked the log. Dozens of calls from Lin. His jaw tightened. This isn't a warning. It's pressure. His mother sobbed. She said if I don't support the restructuring vote, we'll lose everything. Yuri's eyes turned cold. So she's blackmailing you. I don't know what's true anymore, his mother whispered. Yuri's voice dropped steady. That doubt isn't yours. It was planted. He blocked Lin's number with one clean motion. His mother stared, shocked, then broke down harder. But what if Tutier? Stop, Yuri said, sharper than he meant to. He softened immediately. We don't decide blood by rumour. Through the glass panel of the meeting room door, Yuri could see hands preparing to vote. And behind it all, Lyn sat perfectly still, watching the hallway like she was waiting for a signal. Yuri's lawyer rushed out, breathless. Yuri, they're resuming the vote. Yuri looked at his mother. She was shaking on the edge of collapse. He made the decision in his bones. He turned to his lawyer. Buy me 5 minutes. The lawyer hesitated. If they vote. 5 minutes, Yuri repeated. Please. The lawyer ran back inside. Yuri faced his mother again. You're going to make a statement, on record, about the calls, about the pressure, about what Lyn told you. His mother blinked through tears. Where? Yuri's voice hardened with purpose. To the authorities. His mother grabbed his sleeve, terrified. Yuri, I'm scared. Yuri held her hands. I know. That's why we're going where fear doesn't get to vote. Behind the glass, Lyn's expression finally slipped. Just a crack. She reached for her phone. Yuri saw it, and he knew whatever Lyn did next wouldn't be about shares anymore. It would be about stopping truth before it could speak. Yuri walks into Ansang's shareholders meeting as Gok sighed, and Lyn push a temporary restructuring vote. Yuri and his lawyer slow the clock, demanding proxy checks, originals, and formally disputing the 55% transfer as manipulation. Lyn stays composed, tracking Yuri's reactions. Meanwhile, Tutier returns to authorities to advance a chain of custody DNA process, but Mrs. Lan refuses to see her after Lyn plants doubt that Tutier isn't her biological daughter. Threat texts reinforce the pressure, warning Tutier to stop. Back at the company, new legal counsel arrives to validate voting rights and rush the agenda. Just as the vote is about to proceed, Yuri is pulled out. His mother has arrived in tears, shaken by Lyn's non-stop calls and threats about losing everything. Yuri blocks Lyn and decides to take his mother to make an official statement before the vote seals everything.